Heavy Object is the 2015 adaptation of the light novel, made by the same writer as A Certain Magical Index and A Certain Scientific Railgun. I watched A Certain Magical Index back as one of my first anime that I ever watched of my own will, and I thought it was pretty good. So did he do as good a job with Heavy Object? Heavy Object is based in a world that has more advanced technology, which has evolved warfare into using gigantic weapons known as objects. Objects are so powerful that they are the only way of warfare, leading battles to be decided pretty much just by who has more objects at their disposal. Terrifying as it may seem, rather than numerous deaths being accounted for in wars, only do the objects with their pilots face any danger, so the casualties are dramatically decreased with the object warfare. Objects are the only things that can destroy objects. Well, at least that is until our protagonist Kwinter and his fellow soldier Javier prove that regular people are even capable of defeating such colossal weapons. During the start of the series, Kwinter is responsible for saving the elite Melinda, the pilot of the Baby Magnum, which is their base's object. Kwinter and Javier's heroic displays have earned them prestige, as well as more missions where that came from. So throughout Heavy Object, we follow the crew as they go up against the odds, and doing various missions involving taking down other objects with their genius planning. So I'm to assume the end goal for this series is for the world to be at peace and no longer have wars. There's also the possibility of the end goal being Kwinter accomplishing his goal of becoming an engineer/designer for objects, or something. Though the problem is we have no sense of progress within the story. We never have any checkpoints as to say, we need to do this in order to do this towards gaining peace. Like if that meant negotiations or battles that needed to be won and such, but nope. All we can really take away from this show is having an enjoyable ride of watching Kwinter and Javier pull off some awesome wins against objects and rivaling coalitions. That's neither a good thing or a bad thing. Sure, it's not as satisfying if there's no clear progression throughout the story, but for what it gives you, it's still entertaining. Kwinter is where the majority of the entertainment comes from. He is unique in the fact that rather than being a gun-toting soldier, he is a simple engineer student, and because of that, he is forced to use his brain to win battles. Well, with a little help of explosives, I guess. Kwinter has such an incredible grasp on how things like objects and various chemicals and devices work. This makes his character more interesting than a typical war hero. He has his own little specialty that can be used as a weapon when it isn't a weapon. Kwinter's motivations are also pretty clear. He wants to become some sort of engineer designer that works on objects, and I say that's a pretty legitimate motivation for him, so I like it. It's because of his dedication to learning engineering and his vast knowledge that makes everything he does feel justified instead of like an ass pull. He doesn't get hung up on anything and is usually a rather calm and positive individual. And when put in the right situation, he can be more nurturing and caring. Overall, a very solid protagonist, I'd say. Though he does suffer from the oblivious about women trope, which sucks. But it's not really a problem. And he's also a pervert, but that is also something I don't find a big deal since it has so little prominence. It just feels a bit of place and force sometimes when it does happen. Javier is more or less the typical best friend character, and Kwinter and him complement each other really well. Both of them work together nicely, and their banter between each other feels pretty genuine and like they're real friends. They usually have a similar thinking from a problem-solving, object-destroying standpoint. But Javier doesn't have quite the knowledge that Kwinter does, so he is usually taking orders rather than giving them. Though in the first few episodes, Javier was more the leader until Kwinter got his confidence. The problem with Javier would be that he sometimes just sort of serves the purpose of being the guy who says, "What does that mean?" or any prompt that explains what the plan is. It's not very blatant or offensively done, but it degrades Javier's own intelligence in order to give an explanation to the viewer. But it's an explanation that is required usually since we're dealing with objects that don't actually exist, so we can't exactly put the pieces of the puzzle together ourselves. Javier's motivations and backstory were lightly touched upon because they were pretty straightforward. It almost cheapens royalty in the series because of how many royals there are, but he's fighting to prove himself to his family, to inherit the estate and such. Nothing too special, but it beats a lot of excuses I've heard for backstories. Melinda is the most disappointing main character, I think. She initially had some development, a touch of her motives, and interesting feelings of hers about people she is sent out to save by piloting the object. She is only ever really developed by small talk between missions, and the rest of her screen time apart from that is her piloting the Baby Magnum, which adds nothing to her character. She doesn't exactly contribute to the strategy with the ideas, but she's more like a chess piece for Kwinter to use. Kwinter doesn't really need to make a plan until the Baby Magnum is compromised from damage or inability to progress and defeat the enemy. Melinda is also a princess and she falls victim to the trope of needing to be saved. But thankfully she stands on her own in general, packing the firepower with the baby magnum, and she is definitely required to win all battles. It just kind of sucks that she has some moments where she is a typical princess character. But it kind of makes sense too, because if she didn't need help, then Kwinter and Javier wouldn't be needed sometimes. Melinda as a character, for what we get, I do like. She suffers from jealousy over Kwinter, but that's because Kwinter is someone she has grown to cherish, being someone who's given her something to look forward to in her stressful position. But overall, Melinda's development and interactions go downhill quite steeply after her few moments at the beginning, and that's something I would have liked to see more of. One thing I can say Melinda succeeds in, though, is being adorable. Frelacia would be my second favorite character, probably. She is the big sister type to Kwinter and Javier. When Kwinter and Javier are goofing off, she'll give them a good scolding, and as much as they can make her pissed off, she cares about her soldiers, and even though her personality type is relatively common, she has a bit of a break from convention with her attitude, like things such as exploiting herself to tease the boys. That's not really a good thing, is it? And because she isn't trying to hide the fact that she appreciates Kwinter and Javier when they do a good job, and shows that to them. Frelacia had her own little part where she got her time in the spotlight. She was accompanying the injured Kwinter, and she opened up to him, then to later be assisted by Kwinter to help her with her problem, strengthening her bond with her fellow soldier. Not only did that give her pretty good motivation for being where she is, but it changed her and made her happier with Kwinter and her time with the legitimate kingdom. Now, I haven't mentioned too much about development for each character, because that's a bit of an issue the show has. They introduce some characters and develop them decently for the time they have, which is usually an episode or two, but then they just move on and abandon them. It isn't like they met them in a village to save them, and they obviously have to leave them behind. It's people within their units and such, so they don't have that excuse really. I just find it a disappointment that we don't get to have more characters that we can grow on and get to know, because some of the characters like Glasses Lady and stuff I all wanted to learn more about. Perhaps they return in the light novel after where the anime leaves off, but it's still a disappointment regardless. And the other issue is the fact that every character we don't get a deeper look into them, and we aren't able to get much development apart from the character building that we see throughout the object battles. It makes sense because it's a military anime which has no time for taking it easy or giving exposition on their backstories, but it would be nicer if we could have gotten some more development between the characters outside of just the battles constantly. An example of what I would have wanted to see would be how at the end of the series in the credits, there's basically a slideshow of images of Kwinter and Melinda and everyone shopping. And that's exactly what I would have liked to see, to have them build up who they are personally, and especially would have helped Melinda. In Heavy Object, the background art can be really good, and the texturing used for the CG is nice because it doesn't stick out so much that it doesn't fit in with the 2D, but it blends really well. The character designs for the characters like Kwinter and Melinda were pretty distinct, I thought. Kwinter's longish blonde hair makes him stick out nicely, and Melinda is really cute and has that very distinct suit that she is always wearing. Those two are pretty memorable because of that, and the rest are also fairly well done, but not quite to Kwinter and Melinda's extent, I don't feel. Javier is kind of plain though, especially for a main character. You only keep Kwinter in your mind when you think of Heavy Object, rather than Javier. The animation is fairly consistent throughout. It has some small dips in quality in terms of how natural the character movements can get, but there's quite a bit of running around, so I wouldn't really blame them. The studio being J.C.Staff, I wouldn't expect less from them, because J.C.Staff in the past I have seen from them some of the best CG in anime, because their CG blends in nicely enough while not being seamless, and the movements are usually better than other CG I've seen. The CG for Heavy Object is so close to being absolutely excellent, but it does maintain the same problems I have with other studio CG, which is usually looking choppy. I assume because it's 3D, they can transition the objects and appendages from one location to another perfectly smooth. So it makes me wonder if it's deliberately reduced in quality to fit with the anime better, but they do occasionally have some CG movements that are smooth frame rates and they are beautiful, but they are sadly in the more mundane parts of the animation, like a piston lowering a ramp or something. But choppy or not, I would say it's still rather good CG for anime. The only thing that is consistently not incredible, I would say, would maybe be the water, but it still works and gets the effect across. The soundtrack has some good songs that stick out and everything fits the mood appropriately. Then moments where victory is about to be achieved, the song that plays enhances the moment I found. I don't want to spend too much time on the opening and ending, so I'll try to go over it quickly. The first opening starts off strong musically, then a quieter second part. The visuals are made up of comedic interpretations of the missions and stuff that Kwinter and Javier need to do. Then it turns into an upbeat montage glorifying everything the show has to offer, and it really heightens your spirits for watching the show, and it makes it feel like the show is going to be a blast, even though the show is basically practically suicide missions, which represents how the show takes a lighthearted approach to war. The song is complemented by visuals which really push you into getting pumped up. I think it's pretty good. And because the series has two parts to it, the openings and endings change halfway. Second opening theme has a pretty good build up at the beginning and then bursts into an uplifting guitar part. Then it gets more quiet and groovy and transitions into the meat of the song. The visuals are pretty much what you would expect for an opening, a montage of characters fooling around, then building up to what the anime is all about, and flashing some of the conflicts to come. The English in the song, though, made me recognize how the vocals aren't exactly excellent, but they do a good job and the opening is pretty decent. The first ending is basically made up of various still images, pretty basic, and the song isn't bad, but nothing mind-blowing. Same comments about the second ending, but with more animation, and the story it conveys is pretty cute, but all that does is make me wish the anime had more stuff like that in the actual show. Now, the voices of the show were all pretty well done. Kwinter is voiced by someone who I think was a Funimation newbie at the time, and he's one of my favorite newbies in recent memory. He nails Kwinter's character, and he has the softness, determination, or silliness when the situation demands it. The only problem with Javier is that he's voiced by Mika Seleucid, and because Kwinter's voice actor was a newbie, I was super confused at the beginning because I thought they were both voiced by the same person. But anyway, that's not really a problem. Javier's voice was pretty similar to Kwinter's in most ways. Melinda's voice was excellent with Alexis Tipton, and Frolatio was really good at the big sister sadist type voice. So let's go over how much I liked Heavy Object. Heavy Object takes a more light-hearted approach to war, but it takes itself seriously enough that you care for the conflicts that occur, so you can take it seriously yourself. At the beginning, it was more on the serious side, but that is only until they have established that they have the ability to defeat objects themselves. I personally don't feel a majority of the jokes are intrusive and forced, but there is a decent amount of little funny comments from each character, which is once again because of the more rose-tinted glasses look into war. That being said, there isn't any dramatic character deaths or anything. It's something you can watch without feeling tense, since you never feel there's any serious danger or damage that will happen to our main characters. Well, maybe a bit later, but there's no way the author would kill off the main character at that point. That could be a little less incentive for people because it doesn't carry as much weight though. So it's not going to be as gripping as a gritty, tragic war story, but it does well for people who want to chill out and have something that's fun to watch. The series is very military based, and because of that it's more focused on the battles and conflicts than the characters themselves. So we don't get much development apart from the more in-between parts that are transitions to new arcs. I would have liked to see the characters expanded upon, definitely. There's a surprising bit of perversion and fan service in Heavy Object, and some moments feel a bit forced sometimes, but the military battles heavily outweigh any sort of fan service and perverted scenes. And the fan service is not very intense really, just more suggestive with some shots than anything. If you dislike fan service in your anime, Heavy Object isn't the worst, but it does have some, and that can be irritating if you're really against it. One nice thing about Heavy Object is that there's plenty of information in the show that you need to learn, such as things like what the objects are and how they work. And during these missions, there are certain circumstances that need to be dealt with these mechanical engineering ways. So with both the information and explaining mechanical possibilities of defeating the enemies, they generally do it in a way that feels more natural, like it serves a purpose rather than some tedious info dump that goes over your head because you could care less. Though in the beginning it was more info dumpy, but that's establishing the world and that can be more forgivable. Though Kwinter had me interested in each component and every detail of his plan when explaining them. Science fiction anime tend to have technology and stuff that would have people listing off weird parts that make no sense to the main character and why they need to be fixed or something. Like, go get those plasmoid solicizers. Quickly, we need them to fix the chrono hyperplasmabid stock engine. But the things Kwinter talks about are relatively realistic, like how one object has its power cable, or something that uses a surplus of power to be deposited, or something like that. I have to say I didn't know how it could get any better as it went on, but the second last arc was amazing, and the last arc was also still pretty good. It was such a blast to watch. It had the odds way stacked against them and had some interesting turns. It brought some more elements to the table, like the weapons used during battle. The most satisfying part was how reasonable the solutions were, which is basically representing the entire series as a whole, having a believable solution to the problems presented. And that is where I got most of my enjoyment from. It's great, and I love the way the characters interact with each other. They all felt like genuine people who were friends and such. As much as a blast I had watching it, I did feel it was lacking something like closure, or at least something to work towards. That and the lack of certain character development. But that all said, it's still worth the ride on its own. So if you're looking for a series with a less than conventional protagonist that is a genius who reigns victorious because of his brains over brawn, some characters that are for the most part decent, animation that holds up and has CG that doesn't stick out, a soundtrack that does the series justice, want a military anime, then Heavy Object should be something up your alley. But if you want a series with a plot that has a defined goal with clear progression, something with more time dedicated to character development, hate CG use in anime, want something with a protagonist that physically battles things out, can't stand fan service or perverted characters at all, want a war story with more seriousness and weight, want a series with a larger cast of characters to be developed, or aren't interested in the genres covered by Heavy Object, then chances are you won't find it that enjoyable. At the time of recording, Funimation has licensed Heavy Object and you can officially watch it on a ton of places. Funimation subbed and dubbed, Hulu and Yahoo View for free Hulu streaming, sub only I think. Daisuke.net sub only, I assume, because they don't have anything besides the paid Gundam Origin movies that has a dub, but it has premium options separate from the free Heavy Object, so I don't know. Then Animax sub only it looks like. Though Funimation is also accessible in the UK for Heavy Object. And finally Anime Lab for Australia and New Zealand. Can't find out if it's sub only or not though. I think that's the longest where to watch segment yet. So what did you think of Heavy Object? Did you find the character development kinda disappointing for characters like Melinda? Did you want there to be some sort of defined end goal that they were progressing towards? Did you hate that it wasn't a full-on ecchi? If you're interested in seeing more videos like this one, then check out my other reviews. You might find something you like. And subscribe if you're looking forward to more reviews.